We have a real problem in identifying the sea peoples. We're pretty sure that the Peleset of the sea peoples are the Philistines mentioned in the Bible.
3,000 years ago, entire civilizations vanished almost overnight. Palaces burned, trade routes broke, and kings sent desperate letters no one lived to answer.
He's reporting that his city, his town, is surrounded by ships. It says, "The enemy ships are already here. They've set fire to my towns and have done very great damage in the country."
Across the Mediterranean, one name kept appearing in the wreckage: the Sea Peoples. No one knew where they came from, only that wherever their ships landed, empires fell.
We often accuse the Sea Peoples, the Philistines, and the other groups that are there as being plunderers and people who just came in and destroyed everything in order to create their new land.
For centuries, their story ended there, until their buried remains revealed something no historian ever imagined: the rise and rampage of the Sea Peoples. The Late Bronze Age was once a tightly connected world, a network of kings, merchants, and messengers linking great civilizations across thousands of miles. Egypt, the Hittite Empire, the cities of the Levant, and the palaces of the Aegean all belonged to one vast system. Ships carried copper, tin, and fine textiles across the sea. Palaces stored food, traded gifts, and sent diplomatic letters carved into clay tablets. For centuries, that web of trade and trust held steady. Then, near the end of the 13th century, BCE, the system started to crack. Egypt gives us our first glimpse of what went wrong, and who might have caused it. Carved deep into stone walls and temple facades are the first reports of strange attackers coming from the sea. These weren't myths written long after the fact. They were official accounts by scribes who recorded events for the pharaohs themselves. They list the names of enemies, the years they struck, and where the fighting took place. And from those inscriptions, the mystery of the Sea Peoples was born. The earliest clear mention appears under Pharaoh Merneptah, son of Ramses II. On the walls of Karnak Temple, a long inscription tells of a war against Libyan forces, and it also names several groups from the islands, or of the sea. The list includes the Shirdan, Shekelesh, Ekwesh, Teresh, and Luka. The tone is celebratory, boasting of Egypt's victory, but behind the royal triumph is a clear message. New enemies were arriving from across the water. It's important to understand that these names, the Shirdan, the Ekwesh, and the rest, aren't what those people called themselves. They're how Egyptian scribes heard and wrote them. A generation later, Egypt faced them again. This time, the pharaoh was Ramesses III, and his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu preserves some of the most detailed battle scenes from the entire ancient world. The walls show a combined assault, some invaders coming by sea in ships, others moving overland with their families, carts, and animals beside them. These were not small raids, they were mass movements of people. The inscriptions tell us Egypt fought them both on the delta's shores and along its northern frontiers. The carvings show ships slamming together head-on, Egyptian archers firing from the shore, and foreign soldiers wearing feathered crowns locked in hand-to-hand combat. The pharaoh declared victory, boasting that Egypt had turned back the storm and restored peace. Far from Egypt, another part of the ancient world was facing disaster at the very same time. In the coastal city of Ugarit, in what is now northern Syria, scribes were pressing messages into clay tablets to plead for help. One letter warned that enemy ships had been sighted and begged the king to bring soldiers and chariots inside the city walls. Another reported that 7 ships had already attacked and caused terrible destruction. A third message said that 20 enemy ships were racing along the coast and no reinforcements were coming. These were urgent messages between rulers, written in haste and never meant to last. The only reason they survived is because Ugarit was soon destroyed and set ablaze. The heat from that fire hardened the clay tablets, preserving them for thousands of years. Those words, frozen in time, are the last cries of a city on the edge of extinction. The mighty Hittite Empire, Egypt's long-standing rival, vanished from history around this same time. Its last known ruler, Shuppiluliuma II, left behind no heir and no more royal records. The capital, Hattusa, fell silent and never rose again. In Ugarit, scientists have dated the city's destruction to between 1192 and 1190 BC, perfectly matching the time of those frantic letters warning of enemy ships. Farther west, the Palace of Pylos in Greece met the same fate. Its administrative tablets survived only because fire baked them hard before the building collapsed. Those records stop mid-sentence, shipments uncounted, reports unfinished, freezing the exact moment an entire system of government came to an end. Across the region, the pattern was unmistakable. Cities burned, trade routes shattered, and ancient kingdoms that had stood for centuries disappeared from the record. Egypt carved its triumphs into stone, but even those carvings reveal how close the kingdom came to falling. Some of the carvings even show captives being brought before the pharaoh with their hands raised in surrender. The Sea Peoples left more than names in Egyptian walls. They left fingerprints buried beneath the cities they changed. Life after the invasion. The world the Sea Peoples built. When the last Bronze Age cities fell silent, the story of the Sea Peoples continued underfoot, buried in the sands and stones of the same coast they invaded. Centuries later, archaeologists peeling back those layers began to notice something unusual. In the ruins of the southern Levant, along the edge of the Mediterranean, the ground revealed a clean break between two worlds. The familiar life of the late Bronze Age, and a new one that began suddenly in the Iron Age. It was as if the coastline itself had changed hands. The best places to see this are 5 cities that still mark that shore: Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, Gath, and Gaza. These would later be known as the heartland of the Philistines, but in their earliest Iron Age layers, they tell another story, the one the Egyptian walls had only hinted at. Here, in the aftermath of invasion and migration, the Sea Peoples left something more permanent than wrecked ships or battle scenes. They left a way of living. Everything shifts at once. The cooking pots are new. The house plans are new. The small household shrines, the storage jars, the tools, all change together. It's not one thing you can point to. It's a full package of habits arriving as a set. Archaeologists call this kind of change a horizon because it rises across many sites at once, as if a single dawn swept the coast. And this horizon, unmistakably, belongs to the newcomers from the sea. Pottery gives the first and clearest clue. Every civilization leaves its fingerprint in clay, and in these early Iron Age layers, that fingerprint looks foreign. In places like Ashdod and Ekron, new shapes appear: wide bowls, tall-handled jugs, and deep mixing jars called craters. Their designs and painted lines look straight out of the Aegean world, the same region the Sea Peoples were said to have come from. But the clay tells another story. Chemical and microscopic tests prove these vessels weren't imported. They were made right there, from Levantine soil. The potters were local, or had become local, copying and adapting the styles they brought with them. That finding changed everything. Whoever these newcomers were, they'd learned the land and its clay, setting up their own workshops. At Ekron, where the soil layers are stacked cleanly like pages in a book, archaeologists could track this transition step by step. This early wave of pottery is known as Philistine monochrome, painted in a single color over pale clay. The most common pieces are bell-shaped bowls, broad craters for mixing wine, and thick cooking jugs for open fires. As generations passed, the same workshops shifted toward more colorful work, using red and black paint over a white slip. This second phase, Philistine bichrome, produced patterns of spirals, birds, and bands curling around the shoulders of jars. The change isn't sudden. It's slow, steady, and homegrown. By the end of the Iron One period, the bright colors fade again, but the local identity remains. Yet pots alone can't tell the whole story. To see how people truly lived, you have to look at their homes. In these same coastal cities, something new shows up right at the heart of their houses. A circular pebble hearth. It's a shallow circle set into the floor, paved with smooth stones and blackened by years of ash. These weren't side ovens. They sat in the middle of living rooms, a gathering place for warmth, cooking, and conversation. The same kind of hearths appear in Aegean and Cypriot homes of the same age. That's not a coincidence. It's evidence of lifestyle carried across the sea and rebuilt on new ground. At Ekron and Gath, these hearths show up everywhere in the right layers. Archaeologists even rebuilt them using the same materials, lighting fires to see how they burned. The results match the ancient traces perfectly. Rings of ash, scorched stones, and heat patterns that matched what's buried in the floors. Around these hearths sat cooking jugs with strainers, open bowls sturdy enough for fire, and rows of large storage jars along the walls. Ashkelon, farther south, adds another piece. Its early Iron Age kitchens reveal trade connections that kept the coast alive long after the Great Bronze Age collapse. Mineral analysis of the clay shows that some of the large jars there were made with material from the Lebanese coast, not local sand. Imported Cypriot pottery also turns up in the same rooms. So even as this new coastal culture formed, its people kept their sea lanes open. The very thing that brought the Sea Peoples here, the ocean, remained the highway that sustained them. The shift wasn't limited to cooking and storage. It reached into belief and ritual too. In the same early Iron Age layers at Ashdod, Ekron, and Ashkelon, archaeologists uncovered small clay figurines that looked nothing like the idols of the old Canaanite world. One is a standing female figure with arms raised, the Sai figure, familiar from Aegean art. Another, nicknamed the Ashdoda, shows a seated woman on a throne, painted in the same colors as the new pottery. They appear suddenly, right as the new household horizon emerges, and fade away when that style blends into the Levantine one. In many houses, small altars, benches, and offering stands appear beside them. These weren't monumental temples, but domestic shrines, faith practiced at home, carried across the water with its worshippers. Gath gives the most human glimpse of all. Excavations there reveal entire neighborhoods from this time, streets full of jewelry, loom weights, and cooking tools sitting beside the same new pottery and pebble hearths. Some houses keep Bronze Age designs, others are completely new. The mix isn't random. It shows the gradual weaving of two worlds, locals and newcomers sharing walls, crafts, and families. The change isn't violent or instant, it's steady and layered, the kind that only everyday life can build. For years, though, one piece of the puzzle was missing. Archaeologists could see how these people lived, but not how they died. That gap finally closed between 2013 and 2016, when the Leon Levy expedition uncovered a cemetery outside Ashkelon. It held more than 200 burials. Most were simple pits, others were stone-lined tombs, and a few were cremations with ashes placed in jars. Nearly every grave included a small juglet, a delicate vessel identical to the ones found in their homes. The cemetery dates between the 11th and 8th centuries BCE, exactly overlapping the rise and maturity of the coastal culture that had followed the Sea People's landings. The burials are plain but precise. The bodies were laid out neatly, often with one or two small vessels, sometimes jewelry or a tool. The mixture of burial types, pit, tomb, and cremation, shows variety within a shared custom, like accents in the same language. The grave goods match the household pottery, tying daily life and death together through the same clay. Whatever name these people carried, they belonged to one community. This was no passing fleet. It was a people who had taken root. The Sea Peoples built their homes here and vanished into history. But their bones didn't vanish, and what scientists found inside them changed everything we thought we knew about their past. The truth, hidden in the Sea People's DNA. Inside every human bone, there's a hidden archive of ancestry, ancient DNA, the genetic code preserved in tiny fragments deep inside the skeleton. It survives best in the densest part of the skull, a spot near the inner ear where bone protects it from heat and decay. When scientists extract and read that DNA, they can compare it to genetic data from other ancient people and see where the threads connect. If two groups once had children together, the genetic patterns overlap, a trace of mixing that never lies. The strongest clues about the Sea Peoples come from Ashkelon, the same city whose cemetery helped fill the gap in the archaeological record. From its soil, researchers extracted material from 3 distinct horizons: skeletons from the old Canaanite city that existed before the Sea Peoples arrived, infant burials from the early Iron Age when their culture first appeared, and adult remains from centuries later, when that new way of life had already taken root. This sequence let scientists watch the change unfold, generation by generation, a rare gift in a land where heat, salt, and time usually erase every trace of DNA. In 2019, the findings were published, and the results stunned even seasoned historians. The researchers didn't just analyze scraps of DNA, they sequenced whole genomes, the complete set of genetic instructions, and compared them across the timeline. The question was simple: what changed when the Sea Peoples arrived, and how long did those changes last? The study involved 10 individuals in total. 3 were from the Bronze Age, people who lived before the Sea Peoples ever reached the coast. 4 were infants, buried in the early Iron Age, right at the start of the new coastal culture. And 3 were later Iron Age adults, laid to rest centuries after the transition had begun. 10 might not sound like much, but in ancient DNA work from warm climates, that's a breakthrough. And what those 10 revealed was a shift in ancestry so clear and so brief that it reshaped how historians think about the movement of people in this period. The Bronze Age group served as the baseline. Their DNA looked like what scientists expected from long-settled communities of the southern Levant, a mix that had been stable for centuries. But in the early Iron Age infants, the first generation born after the Sea Peoples arrived, something new showed up. Their genomes carried a small but distinct signal pointing towards southern Europe. When plotted against genetic maps from other ancient populations, these children didn't match their Bronze Age predecessors. Instead, they showed a faint pull toward the north side of the Mediterranean, toward ancient populations from areas like Greece, Sardinia, or Iberia. That doesn't mean those babies came from those exact places. It means some of their ancestors did. Genetic relatedness isn't a passport, it's a pattern. The key takeaway was that, right when the new coastal culture appeared, a new kind of ancestry appeared with it. Southern European in flavor, Western in direction, and absent from the region's earlier DNA. The next surprise was how quickly that signal faded. By the time the later Iron Age adults were buried in the same Ashkelon cemetery, the European-linked ancestry had almost disappeared. Their DNA looked much like the older local Bronze Age population again. The genetic footprint of the Sea Peoples had been diluted within just a few generations. It was as if a drop of dark ink had fallen into a pale pool, noticeable at first, then quickly blended back toward the base color. That doesn't erase the arrival. It proves they came, mixed with locals, and within a few centuries, became part of them. To geneticists, this finding was extraordinary. It suggested that the Sea Peoples who brought the new coastal culture were real but few, and that their descendants quickly married into the communities they joined. The culture stayed long after the distinct DNA signal had faded. So what exactly does a signal like this look like? First, scientists check that the DNA is genuinely ancient and not modern contamination. Old DNA carries a specific kind of damage, chemical scars that develop over thousands of years. Only samples that show this pattern count as authentic. Then they use two main tools. One is a visual map called a principal component plot. Every genome is a point on a graph. People with similar ancestry cluster together. If someone's DNA sits mostly with Levantine populations but drifts slightly toward ancient groups from southern Europe, that drift is the telltale sign of shared ancestry. The second tool uses mathematical tests that model how different populations could have mixed to produce the observed results. These tests don't say, this person was Greek, or this person was Sardinian. They say, this person's ancestry can only be explained if we include a small contribution from ancient populations most like those in southern Europe. That's what the Ashkelon team found, and they found it consistently across those early Iron Age samples. Then, as the centuries passed, the signal disappeared. To place Ashkelon in a wider context, researchers looked at other studies across the region. A 2020 paper analyzed more than 70 individuals from Bronze and Iron Age sites throughout the southern Levant. These weren't sea peoples, but inland populations, people from areas that had kept older traditions. Their genomes showed continuity with the past, shaped mostly by long-term local ancestry and some older Eastern influences that had been mixing in for centuries. In short, when the coast was receiving a brief infusion from the west, the inland heartlands were continuing on their steady path. Science revealed who the Sea Peoples were, but history still had one more secret to tell: how the Sea Peoples ruled the sea itself. How the Sea Peoples became masters of the sea. To understand how the Sea Peoples could strike coast after coast, you have to start with what carried them: their ships. The famous battle scenes carved on the temple walls of Pharaoh Ramesses III are blueprints in stone. Those carvings show ships locked in close combat, their high ends curved like hooks. Decks are crowded with men, bows ready, grappling hooks flying. Egyptian archers fire from stable rafts, while the Sea Peoples drive their light vessels straight into the fight, ramming and boarding before the Egyptians can reload. So what kind of ship could fight like that? The answer lies in speed and flexibility. The Sea Peoples didn't rely on heavy war galleys. They used light boats with shallow hulls that could skim across sandbars and slide into river mouths where deeper ships would ground. Archaeologists studying those carvings realized the key. These were sewn plank ships, vessels literally stitched together with cords or plant fibers that passed through small holes between the planks. Inside, wooden frames were lashed to the hull instead of nailed. The result was a strong but flexible ship that could bend with the waves instead of cracking. A sewn boat might sound fragile, but it was the perfect tool for raiding. Light enough to haul onto a beach at night, quick to repair, and easy to relaunch at dawn. Across the Mediterranean, from the Bronze Age all the way to the medieval era, this method of boat building shows up again and again. The Sea Peoples weren't unique in using it, but they turned it into a weapon. Light hulls made all the difference in shallow waters. The Nile Delta and Levantine coast are full of shifting channels and sandbars where heavier ships get stuck, but a sewn plank galley could ride those bars on a rising tide, glide upriver, unload its warriors, and vanish again before the enemy's chariots even rolled out. That's what the scenes at Medinet Habu, Ramesses' temple, really show. Egyptian archers turning narrow waterways into killing grounds, trying to funnel the invaders into traps, while the Sea Peoples pressed forward anyway, jamming their hulls against the Egyptian line and forcing the battle onto the decks. The other half of their advantage wasn't in wood, it was in bronze. Around the same time, a new kind of sword began spreading across the Mediterranean. Modern archaeologists call it the Naue II, and it was revolutionary. Earlier Bronze Age warriors used long, thin swords that were perfect for thrusting, but snapped easily. The Naue II was shorter, broader, and tougher, designed to slash as well as stab. It had a thick mid-ridge for strength and a tang built for riveted handles, so you could swing hard without breaking it. These swords first appeared in the western Mediterranean, then spread quickly through the Balkans and the Aegean, reaching the eastern coast, right as the Sea Peoples appeared in history. One was even found in the ruins of Ugarit, the very city whose last letters warned of enemy ships approaching. What made this weapon such a game-changer? Because deck battles are close, messy, and fast. You can't wield long spears or delicate blades when you're shoulder to shoulder on a rocking ship. You need a weapon built for short, sharp strikes, something you can thrust into gaps, pull free, and swing again in tight quarters. The Naue II was perfect for that. Their helmets and armor tell the same story. The feathered crowns carved above the Sea People's heads in Egyptian art have sparked endless debate, but the truth seems simpler. These weren't decorative plumes, they were identity markers. Tracing the designs from the Aegean to Cyprus to the Levant reveals similar crests, plumes, and banded helmets, practical ways to recognize your own men in the chaos of battle. When you fight alongside crews from different ports, those visual signals keep you alive. The coastline they struck also worked in their favor. Ports aren't built out of stone alone, they're shaped by nature. Bays, sandbars, and sheltered coves where a ship can hide from storms. Ashkelon, one of their strongholds, sits on a natural bluff facing a shallow bay that's been used as a harbor for thousands of years. Modern excavations there have exposed the ancient shoreline, showing exactly how wind and waves shaped a perfect landing site. Even today, the surf can rise to dozens of feet in winter, yet that stretch of coast remained a busy maritime hub. The Sea Peoples would have known every trick of that shoreline, how to read the currents, when to strike, and when to slip away. Farther north, at Ashdod Yam, the story shifts to defense. Centuries after the first raids, the same coastline was fortified with massive walls right up to the waterline. Excavations begun in the early 21st century revealed thick gates and towers built to control movement from the water. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.